Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Claudia Kane. I'm from the Scoville Library, and tonight is a joint presentation with Noble Horizons and with the Salisbury Association Historical Society. It's the second in a three-part series about slavery in the Northwest Corner that is put on by students at the Salisbury School. So just a few housekeeping things. If you are here tonight and you're going to attend the final session, which is next Thursday at 7, and I hope you will, you don't need to register again. You'll just use the same link. And we are going to ask everybody to remain muted throughout the presentation, just to make it easier for everybody. And I may mute you if you aren't muted, but don't take it personally. It's just something that has to happen. So tonight we have two students from Salisbury School who are graduates from Salisbury Central School, and they're both seniors. So it's really nice to have the hometown touch here tonight. And this series is on slavery in the Northwest Corner, which is something that students at the Salisbury School have been pursuing for a number of years, I believe. And there are actually two presentations that relate to tonight that were done at Noble Horizons last year. And I believe you can find those recordings on their website. So last week we talked about the general aspects of slavery in Connecticut and specifically in the Northwest Corner. And tonight is going to be a much more focused presentation on slavery here in Salisbury. Or potentially here in Salisbury, and we'll hear how this story evolved. But last year's presentation was on James Marr, who was an enslaved person who was born in Canaan and fled to Norfolk and became a free person. And tonight is going to be a discussion of the research that has been done on James Marr's brother, Joseph Marr, who may have become an enslaved person in Salisbury. And they know far more about this than I do because I know virtually nothing. So I'm going to turn this over to the students, and we will have Q&A following their presentation. So if you have questions, comments, etc., if you'll just put those into the chat and we'll get to them after the presentation. And so I am going to vanish and turn this over to Yves and Niko, who are our presenters for tonight.
Thank you very much.
Well, hello, I'm Yves Macaire.
I'm Niko.
And today we're going to be covering the mystery of Joseph Marr.
So to start off, I think that it's important for us all to have at least basic understanding of the family history. James and Joseph are the son of an enslaved person by the name of Jupiter Marr. Jupiter was first enslaved, at least that we know of, by a general in the Revolutionary War, and Jupiter actually fought in the Revolutionary War as well for the American side. Afterwards, he was sold to an enslaver by the name of Bingham, and then later on he was again sold off to a reverend, his wife, or a minister and his wife. His wife, the minister's wife, owned another slave named Fanny, and Jupiter and Fanny wound up getting married and had 3 kids. That would be Joseph, James, and Elizabeth. The entire time that they were enslaved, they were always threatened by both the minister and his wife about how terrible things would be if they moved back to Virginia, and the minister's wife really just hated it up here. Eventually, the minister and his wife did plan on moving back, but on the eve that they were going to move back, Jupiter took his entire family and they all escaped into the Norfolk area, and they were hid in basements and attics, and they were running through the night away trying to conceal themselves. And live as free a life as they could. Eventually, an ultimatum was reached, and they agreed that Jupiter, Fanny, and Elizabeth would go free. However, James and Joseph, unfortunately, were sold back into slavery. James was sold, and he worked under the Mungers for a long time. Eventually, though, he did gain his freedom and became a very big figure in the church-going community in Norfolk, and he even became a deacon. His brother was, and Yves will go more in depth on this later, but his brother was sold to a farmer by the name of Bingham, the very same man that owned Jupiter at one point. But focusing back on James, he still wasn't afforded rights that were really sort of monuments of the American sort of dream. And he wanted to vote in a presidential election, but he moved to Hartford to try and do this, but they wouldn't allow him to vote. So he eventually moved to Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and was able to vote twice, both times during Abraham Lincoln's presidency. And he had two sons as well, who both fought in the Civil War. And he then wrote his autobiography, and the rest is, well, history, until about a year ago when we uncovered his story and had a witness stone placed in his honor.
So moving on to the mystery. So earlier this year, Mr. McCrisky gave me the task to kind of look deeper into the story of Joseph Mars. And all I was given was a text saying that Joseph was sold to a farmer named Bingham. And that's all the information I had. So I've been, over the past few months, just searching the internet, surfing the web, digging deep into Ancestry.com, looking for the enslaver of Joseph Mars. But I was only given the name Bingham. And Bingham is a very prominent name. During this time period, there was a lot of Binghams in the area. Their family tree is absolutely massive, and this was a pretty challenging task to narrow down to these suspects that we came up with for the enslavement of Joseph Mars. And after James Mars's autobiography was published, there was, or at least I haven't found yet, any information on Joseph Mars. He kind of just disappeared off the face of the earth. Next slide, please. So this was the text from the book African American Lives, which is a compilation of a bunch of different African American stories all put together. And this was out of the James Mars story. So it's this Thompson, who originally refused to go to Virginia without the boys, eventually proposed a compromise by which Mars's father would agree to sell his sons to owners in Connecticut in exchange for his freedom, like Niko said. And so Jupiter Mars was permitted to approve the men to whom his sons would be sold. So on the 12th of September, 1798, Joseph was sold to a farmer named Bingham, who had once owned Jupiter. And that is another key point of information that we've kind of been working on, but we can't find anybody that would fit the description who had owned Jupiter Mars, yet would have lived long enough to be there to buy Joseph Mars. So the first piece of information I have, or I kind of found, was the Bingham Brook Farm, which is located here. You can see on the map on the left side. The bottom right corner is the center of Salisbury, where the White Hart is. And then you go up past the town hall and you go up towards Mount Rego, where there's Rego Lake. And the smaller unmarked lake on the right side is Bingham Pond. And then the little red marker is where this farm is. It is about 270 acres, or was at the time. It is now, I think it's in 60 acres now being sold on the market. But it was a huge chunk of land that the Binghams owned, but unfortunately not during the time period that they were sold. But the Bingham family tree does date back, and multiple generations did live and work on this farm. So our Bingham suspects so far, we've kind of been narrowing it down we've been looking for anybody who maybe had relations to farms, or anybody who was alive in the area during the time. After a couple months of research, the 3 people I've found who are alive and in the area during the time is Caleb Bingham, Daniel Bingham, and Ryle Bingham. And the thing about Caleb Bingham is we do know he wasn't living in the area at the time, although he was visiting, and we do have proof that he was visiting. But there is a lot to be kind of more found out there about the Binghams, because there is a lot of them, and a lot of the history has been covered or lost, and we are not fully knowledgeable about how many Binghams were actually in the area at the time. But this presentation is basically what I have so far. So Caleb Bingham was born April 18th, 1757 in Salisbury, Connecticut, and died April 6th, 1817 in Boston. And he was an educator his entire life. And he was the author of the Columbian Orator, which actually, funny enough, Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, bought at age 13 for 50 cents. And he kind of learned what the Orator was a collection of essays, dialogues, and poems to teach people how to read during the 19th century, or not read, sorry, teach people how to speak properly during the 19th century. And Caleb Bingham published this. Caleb Bingham retired from his education career, which he had run a couple of schools, and also worked as teachers in a couple of schools all around New England. But he retired from his teaching career in 1796 to go on a tour of New England to learn better about how the students were being taught in the schools in the countryside. So he went on a tour in 1796, and it is not known when he returned back to Boston, but it is also not known if he actually bought a house in Boston when he returned. The only information I have is from Caleb Bingham's biography, where it says that presumably he returned to Boston and rented a house with his wife and children. But during the time, it is said that Caleb Bingham was not a farmer, so that is a kind of a lead off of pointing our finger at Caleb Bingham. But he was in poor health, which means he might have needed an extra hand. And during that time, if you were in poor health, it's not just a common cold. There wasn't much medicine and treatment. You could be bedridden for months, and that's where the life expectancy was so low. But so he definitely might have needed a hand, which is kind of set off a key point in my head of why he would need somebody to enslave and help him out. During the time that he did return to Salisbury, though, Jonathan Scoville owned the Bingham Brook farm after Matthias Webb had sold it to him. And I think Jonathan Scoville definitely had contact with Caleb Bingham. We don't have that for sure, but Jonathan Scoville was a very prominent man, and he was living in Salisbury, and so was Caleb Bingham. They're both very high, sophisticated men of the society, so they definitely had something to do with each other. And possibly Caleb Bingham had stayed on the Bingham Brook farm where he had been prior. And I don't know, maybe there's a connection there, but we don't have that solid in stone yet. In 1803, Caleb Bingham donated 150 books to the Scoville Library. It wasn't called the Scoville Library at the time, but that was what is said to be the start of the first public library in New England. And it is also said that he returned to Salisbury later in his life. So Daniel Bingham, this was Caleb Bingham's father. We do not know much about him, although he was born in Salisbury, July 24th, 1728, and died in Salisbury. We don't know the exact day, but it was in 1805. He had 17 brothers and sisters. I went through all of them and looked at their location and death date, and almost 90% of them did not live past 1798. So they were not able to be in consideration for the enslavement of Joseph Mars. But Daniel Bingham stayed in Salisbury his whole life. His father was Jabez Sr., who owned the Bingham Brook farm from 1751 to 1763. And in 1763, he passed it on to Silas, who was Daniel's brother. And Silas held the farm for 60 days before transferring the deeds to Macaire Webb. And that was the last Bingham name who owned the property. We do not know his profession, and we do not know his residence within Salisbury, although we do know he did live in Salisbury. You can actually go visit his grave in the Salisbury graveyard, Daniel Bingham. And our last suspect is Ryle Bingham, who was born in 1758 in Salisbury and died in 1801 in an unknown location. He did live in Salisbury. It was Daniel's brother, one of the ones that did fit the time frame. And he has an unknown profession. So he could have been the farmer. And he also has an unknown place of residence within Salisbury, or at least what I have been able to find. I can't find much information on these guys. There's really nothing at all out there, but that's kind of why we're doing this. We're looking for any information we can get. So next slide, please. Thank you. So basically our goals here is to place a witness stone for Joseph Mars. And to do that, we do need to find solid information on his enslavement and kind of the time frames. Like we have time frame. He was 14 when he was sold, but after that, there's no word at all on Joseph Mars. And who knows, he could have been, since the Binghams were such a prominent family, he could have been, he could have helped, I don't know, push the cart full of books to fund the Scoville Library, or was part of a different family, like branch of the Binghams, and did something else very important. And his life definitely had value to it and was part of helping build our community. And that's kind of the whole goal of the witness stones. This is a quote off their website. Through research, education, and civic engagement, the Witness Stone Projects Incorporation seeks to restore the history and honor the humanity of the enslaved individuals who helped build our communities. So you can see here, there's two witness stones. I just found those the two random ones, but it kind of says their enslaver and the dates, and it's basically a memorial for them because they, without a doubt, had a hand in the construction of our community, and their stories do need to be told. And this is kind of what my hopes are for this. So yeah, that's our presentation.
Nice work, guys. Any questions before we?
Yes, I have a question. Yes.
Go ahead.
I was to believe that when the Afro-American folks were fighting in the Revolutionary War, I thought they were promised freedom. The British offered that to them, and I thought the Americans also offered that. So why was he resold or put back into slavery after the war?
That's a great question. And the answer is it really dependent on the state you're from. For example, that was a promise in Rhode Island, that they would, if you served, you'd be freed. That said, the Black Rhode Island unit was when the war ended, they were in South Carolina, and they just were left there. They didn't have any way to get back. And as a matter of fact, a lot of them end up being taken captive in South Carolina and re-enslaved. So the number of Black veterans who were enslaved who gained their freedom wasn't as high as you think it might be. There were also free Black men that registered. Like last year, we did a project on the Caesars.
Oh, sure.
And Timothy Caesar, who also settled up here with his son Titus, and many generations after, he was a free man who fought in the Connecticut 6th Regiment.
Mhm. Okay, I wasn't aware that enlistees would have been left hanging, although the government wasn't in any shape, or supposedly beginning government wasn't in any shape, I guess, to handle a lot of things.
And don't forget, like, Jupiter probably didn't enlist. He was enslaved by a general. So the general just brought him with him. You know, it wasn't like a
Oh,
willing.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, thanks.
Good question.
Yep.
Okay, so we have another question here about the type of records that you used. In particular, this person would like to know about town tax records and church records. And I believe this is going to be the focus of the final session, but maybe you talk a little bit about what records you did use to find out what you were able to.
Yeah, well, we did ask the town for some records of purchases during that time period, and we came up with nothing. A lot of the records are almost unlegible, and we could not find the name Bingham having anything to do with purchase records. Although we did find in Boston, Caleb Bingham did have non-white members in his household. That was one thing stated. But that's pretty much all we found with town like tax records. And we haven't actually looked into church records, so that's an interesting aspect to look into them.
And part of the reason we're doing this is because we'd love it if this, if you're here and you're interested, like, to pitch in, really crowdsource this to try to solve this mystery. I'll type my email address into the box. We debated ways to solicit information on this, and we just think this might be the easiest and the less messy. And if you want to type yours in as well.
Yeah, sure.
And so, enslaved people were considered property. So we're thinking about going back and looking at property records. Niko is actually doing another project. Yves has been a one-man show on this. His other classmates are engaged in other work. So at this point, we really would like to throw it out to this awesome community to see if anyone has any ideas or any leads or places they want to check.
Yeah, we're going to take all the help we can get with this.
And we have another question about, did Mars print and publish his biography? And do we have any idea who read it?
Well, he did write his autobiography.
Yep.
I'm not sure about the printing of it.
So
it's actually acceptable use. And so I'll post the link that has the entire text. It's also in a book called 5 Black Lives, and it details 5 enslaved African Americans Black people in Connecticut. James Mars being one, and all of them are published in their entirety. It's at Wesleyan Press published them. And we know James Mars had 6 editions of this book, and there's little changes that he makes in each succeeding edition. And he traveled town to town selling them. This family was a remarkable family, this Mars family. You have Jupiter, Revolutionary War veteran. You have Joseph, we don't know a lot about. James, who becomes an accomplished author. Some things that Niko didn't mention is he helped the Amistad crew get lawyers. He started a school for Black children in Hartford at a time where Prudence Crandall in another part of the state had her school like vandalized and burned down, and bricks through the windows for educating Black children. He petitioned the Connecticut State Legislature to vote. He's helped start the Talcott Street Church in Hartford and the second, I think, AME Church in Pittsfield. Remarkable man. He had a brother who you might hear more about next week, who we believe radicalized John Brown. Elizabeth, the little sister, Niko said, became a missionary to Liberia, and she served for 20 years, and her grave is marked over there. Last week, we talked a little about Charlotte Mars, who worked with the Knight family in Salisbury, caring for mentally ill patients. James Mars had 2 sons that fought in the Civil War. I mean, this was as prominent a family as Salisbury like has ever produced in my book. So James Mars published these books and he'd go town to town selling them. And just want to show you one. I might have closed it, unfortunately. No, I didn't. If you look at this picture here, in this slide that Yves put together, you know, this picture of James Mars says a lot. I mean, typically when you were enslaved, you have one outfit, you have one piece of clothing, and that's why with fugitive slave ads, you would frequently see like them list what they were wearing. But look at James Mars here. I mean, this is a man who I mean, it's a three-piece suit. He looks like $1 million. That in and of itself tells a big story.
And we have somebody who's saying that there was a book called Slavery in the Deep North that was discussed at St. John's Church about 8 years ago that discussed the involvement of Northern families in the development of slavery. So, you know, I think that's another really important part of what this project and the previous projects that you've worked on at Salisbury School shows, that it's not just the South who was implicated in the enslavement of people. And I mean, I think it's pretty remarkable that the Salisbury School has done as much as they have. And I know you have something that you're working on now that has to do with the formation of the NAACP and Troutbeck. That I think you're working on with a lot of other schools in the area, both public and private.
Really on that note, the idea to do this project-based, place-based history, Peter Vermillier, who's at Tonic High School, has been doing this for donkey's years, and particularly his work with the Connecticut 29th, which was one of the first Black regiments in the Civil War. I mean, so we're just following in their footsteps, Housatonic's footsteps, but we're partnering with them in Hotchkiss and Sharon Center School and Marvelwood School, and well, there's Indian Mountain School, the Wasaic Project, Weebatuck in Millbrook High School, to put together a 3-day event, April 27th, 28th, and 29th at Troutbeck, which has a remarkable history in and of itself. Maybe we'll get into that at the end, and people who had seen the video already can leave and we might show it again. But I do, at this point, want to highlight my friend Catherine Overton, who is here. I don't know if you heard me reference Timothy Caesar, Catherine, but you're looking at Timothy Caesar's great granddaughter. 5 greats in there, and yeah. She traces her roots back to this area. Her mom grew up here, her aunts, uncles, all the way back to the Revolutionary War. So another really important local family represented by one of our guests today.
Great.
Oh, can I say something?
Yes, of course.
Okay. First of all, I want to tell the boys, you're remarkable. You're my heroes. You guys are just, it's amazing what you've been able to find. I know how hard it is. Listen, it took me 13 years, okay, to get to where I was, where you guys were able to present my story. But I mean, to see what you've been able to come up with just in the last year or so, or a few months, because it is really hard. And I know genealogists that are much more, let's say, credentialed, and they specialize in this kind of stuff. And so if, you find yourself getting stuck, I do have some contacts within the African American Genealogy Society that they specialize in doing this stuff. And maybe even we have chapters in New York, we have chapters all over the country. So they specialize a lot in their areas, like, expertise would be in that area, their local areas, but that doesn't mean that's all they know. And maybe someone else, because I found someone last year online who knew a little bit about, I think it was James Morris. Yeah, because I was trying to help hunt some information down. So if you come across stuff that you just can't find, now I don't know that I can help you with, like your Bingham family. I'm sure there are probably more records out there. Usually when you get to that point, you're going into, you're going into archival stuff. But as far as the African American piece, I believe that there's got to be somebody out there that can help, identify some resources, and I'm willing to take a chance. I mean, and contact some people if I can, because I know how hard it is, and you guys are just doing amazing stuff.
Thank you.
And
Thank you very much.
I'm so proud of you guys. You're like my family now, because my whole family knows what you're doing. So, and we appreciate it. And for someone who mentioned the Revolutionary War soldiers, that a lot of things that are, unfortunately, a lot of things that were supposed to be done for the Revolutionary War Black soldiers after, the war was over, just reneged on. I mean, nothing has ever, I hate to start preaching, but nothing that has been promised since then has ever been taken for granted by us, because even my ancestor was thrown in the ground in an unmarked grave. And it wasn't until 200 years later that I was able to get him a gravestone, because I did research like you're doing. And so what you're doing is going to result in, just helping other families like mine, find, their roots. Basically, you're doing what Henry Louis Gates is doing. You're helping us find our roots, and we thank you so much.
Hey, Catherine, will you talk a little bit about like what it means for you, like having a community do this work?
It not only means something to me, as a descendant, and I, I got to start speaking like I call myself a griot. That's an African term for storyteller. I'm the person that this was passed on to from my mother, who went to school there. She finished school in 1936 at Lakeville High School. Yes, she did. And I had several other, well, if you look back over the Scoville Library, videos, you'll see the story that the boys did last year. But so this is something that, as my daughter says, it gives your family, it makes your family history bigger than just your own family, and it's relevant to, it's being passed on down. That's, to me, that's huge. It's passing this information down to the next generation, because the fact that my grandsons got a chance to work with you guys and help put together our story means I know now that they're going to continue this family's, research, and they're going to carry it forward. So what you're doing is not just for us now; it's going to be carried forward. And it is also for me, personally, I felt like I was doing something for my mother. She's the one that started me doing it, although it took me a while to catch on, right? Hey, I was young and interested in other things. It wasn't until I finished working and all that, and I had time, that I dove into doing all the research. But I am so happy to have this as a legacy, and to carry forward my mother's vision, which was for people to understand that we fought in the Revolutionary War as free Blacks, to have people understand that we made contributions to this country. Even though at the time, even when we owned property up on Sharon Mountain, my great-grandfathers were not allowed to vote. Something we're still fighting for. So when you think about all the things that were written about, what the Constitution says, we're supposed to be able to vote, we've been fighting that battle even since the Revolutionary War ended. And most of the slaves, I can't say it as a historian, but what I have uncovered, most of those promises just went out the window after the war. Nobody was, they were either re-enslaved, or there was some finagling, that happened, and so it's very sad to tell you this, but no, not that was not true, that everybody got their freedom. Now, we were not enslaved. That's another story I talked about last year. There was a story going around that, our property came from, my ancestor fighting in the war and getting the property from that. That's not true. So I made sure to clear that up, because I have the documents and the deeds and all that. But, unfortunately, it hasn't been an easy task for those, especially those who were enslaved. And so if you're really looking into slave records, I mean, you guys you're way above me, okay? Because that's one reason why I know I was able, not only was I able because I had an oral history, but also because I was looking into free people who had records because they owned property, who had records because they owned, my grandmothers, my great granduncle, my great aunts went to Salisbury School, like Lakeville. They're in the paper, they're in the Lakeville Journal. All the things that they were doing was in the Lakeville Journal. Everybody's story is not that easy. And mine wasn't easy, even with all those records. But what you guys are doing is it's a specialty. So don't get discouraged, don't feel badly. It isn't your fault that people didn't keep historic records on our people, right? It's not your fault. You're doing the best you can, and you all have a whole lot more computer technology than I had. So I can see that you've done, I mean, just this little bit of time that you come up with, what you have is amazing to me. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I steer away from that slavery stuff. It's very difficult. You all will have a PhD in it when you're done with this.
There's another voice here I'd like to chime in. She typed in the chat, but Katrina, I didn't even see you sneak in. Do you want to add anything, Katrina, more?
Hi, Mr. McCrisky. No, I mean, I agree with what my mom said, that, in general, I put it in the chat, like it really does help give you a sense of identity and purpose. You didn't just start from one dot and all of a sudden you're at another dot and there's nothing in between. And so I said this at another event we said, which was, growing up, I didn't feel like an American. I did it. And it's because of the environments I was in that I was told different things, like go back to Africa, or, you didn't fight for the country. I mean, just different things that makes you feel like you're not a part of being American. So to know that I have the history of knowing all of the people that fought from the beginning of this country, in addition to the indigenous people that were here also that are connected to us. I mean, I feel like you finally feel like, man, I'm a part of the fabric, like everybody else is a part of the fabric of this country that I love so much. And so I think that's important to have that sense of identity in place, right? Just like you have a home house or a home base that you have, there's something about knowing that you belong to somebody and you belong somewhere. And that's what you guys do when you guys get this history.
Yeah.
I do want to just say this. I said it last week, and I'll say it again today. Is I come at this from just a place of total humbleness. Like I fancy myself a historian. I got my degrees in Connecticut. I'm a lifelong nutmegger, and I didn't know that there's slavery in Connecticut really until 3 years ago. And that's why I really tip my hat to Yves and Niko and my students, because they're looking at this history in many cases for the first time. And before the Zoom started, I was joking with Yves, but I'm not joking. Like Yves is the foremost expert on Joseph Mars in the world, right? I mean, like really, we can say that. And it's not just me that's impressed by that. And I hope you guys who've heard this young man talk just incredible poise and wisdom. It's also Yves, who also is a fan, who's coming to speak at the Tropic Symposium because of you. Oh,
Mr. McCrisky, which one?
David Blight, the head of the Yale History Department, who wrote the foreword to a re-release of the Columbian Orator, heard about Yves' research and was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? I got to meet this kid. And he's going to come up and be one of the speakers at the Tropic Symposium. He's the head of Gilder Lehrman. If you're watching Frederick Douglass in 5 Speeches on HBO, which was just dropped last night, which is so good. David Blight's all over it. He wrote a biography of Frederick Douglass. So people, and all of you, I mean, 50 people here tonight learning this history, like this is important. And I love that we live in a community that recognizes that it's important.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if we have any more questions, but we're happy to, or they are happy to answer them.
I think one just came through. Yeah, a couple did.
There is a comment in here about looking at probate records and directing you to the Litchfield Town Hall.
I copied that link, and Yves will be on that beat next class.
Yeah.
That's a great call. I didn't think Litchfield. Yves, did we have any luck with probate records in town hall, or are we not?
No,
Yeah.
we didn't. And I didn't even think about that the county that Salisbury is within would
Yeah.
probably have more detailed records on that.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
a good idea. Good tip. And we have done a lot of searches on newspapers, and we are able to trace James Mars as he's going, bookstore to bookstore around Connecticut selling this book. And there's one really odd front page little blurb from a Winstead newspaper that James Mars is walking down the street in his 70s, late 70s. He lived till he was 90. And bumped into the granddaughter of Munger, the man who enslaved him. Actually, I'm sorry, grandson. They looked at each other, acknowledged each other, and then walked their separate ways. And that was the entire blurb. And it's like, you could almost make a movie of that. Like, what? Give us more. And someone thought it was important enough for a front page story, but there's no other details on that. So we were able to track down a lot of James Mars visits as he was selling his book.
So if there aren't any more questions, I think we're going to wrap up. And I just want to remind everybody that the last session is next week, and same time and same Zoom link. And if you're if you're here tonight, you don't need to register again. And next week is going to focus on, I think, the nitty gritty of how you found everything that you found. Is that correct?
Well, we're going to leave you next week with some other projects, and hopefully also build up some momentum for the Troutbeck Symposium. I'm going to type the URL to the website the boys designed. It's www.coloringourpast. And if you go on there and poke around, you can see some of our work, but also we're going to be adding the work of the other schools. It'll be like a virtual home for the Troutbeck
Right.
Symposium. And then hopefully we'll also get some hot leads from the people here tonight about directions that we should look. And then I also would like to talk about whether or not the town would like to get behind acknowledging Joseph Mars with a witness stone, and where it might be appropriate for that.
Great. And I just want to remind you that if you weren't able to make it tonight, you're not going to hear this, but for those of you who want to revisit this or want to recommend it to friends, it will be up on the Scoville Library's YouTube channel. And I think Mr. McCrisky is putting it up at the Salisbury School. And so it will be available and out there, so you can recommend it to people. And again, I just want to thank everybody for coming, and thank Yves and Niko and Ronan for this great presentation. Again, a lot of accolades in the chat for all the work that you've done, and it's really very impressive. So I think we'll all look forward to the Troutbeck Symposium and next week. So thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.